I'd like to introduce Michael Salkow, from the Learning and Development Manager from Victim Support Scotland. Managed to get that all right. He's going to cover, obviously, what it feels like, or a bit more about what it is to be a victim of crime, and in particular, perhaps sexual crime, which is maybe something that not all of us in the room have a huge amount of knowledge and experience, so I appreciate there will be pockets of that across. And this is really just thinking about a bit of background information, so that when we're dealing with people in the room who perhaps are victims, we have some sort of background knowledge or information about how they might be feeling or presenting. Now, obviously, there's a bit of a gap because there's perhaps a worker who's at that point, accused person who may or may not be guilty, as it were, and there's obviously another side to the story, but I think it's quite helpful just to understand how anyone who's in a position of being a victim of whatever feels, and how we perhaps then interact with them as well as we can. So, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah? Okay, great. Thank you for the introduction, Susan. I'm Michael. I've been working for victim support for around 6 years now, and my main role is making sure that the staff and volunteers at victim support have the knowledge, skills and confidence to be able to support anyone affected by a crime, a victim, a witness, family members, friends and other people in the community. We have around 140 staff and around 600 volunteers across Scotland in 2 services, one in the communities in all 32 local authority areas, and in every sheriff and high court we have a witness service supporting witnesses to go to court to give evidence. That includes prosecution witnesses, defence witnesses and professional witnesses. But more than that, part of my role is making sure that we raise awareness of some of the issues relating to victims and people affected by crime. And I've been asked to talk to you today a little bit about the experience of people affected by crime, but in particular sexual crimes victims who experience the criminal justice system mostly in a very negative way. And I know I'm going to be talking about the criminal justice system because that's where my knowledge base comes from. However, I think there would be a lot of crossovers for yourselves at the tribunals that you hold, that you could take some valuable information away with you. Just before I start, some ground rules. I have a video to show you. I have a few videos. The one in particular is quite sensitive. It is a real victim talking about her experience. I'm showing it to you for a very good reason, to try and prepare you rather than to shock you. So I hope you're all okay with watching the video, but if you're not, I'll give you enough warning if you need to leave. My talk comes from information we've received directly from people affected by crime, my analysis of some of the statistics that are available, police statistics, Scottish crime and justice statistics, and then from other sources that I think are relevant that I wanted to share with you. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what victim support does later. I'm going to cover in my talk some myths and realities regarding crime in Scotland, some of them general, some of them focusing on sexual crimes, the effects that crime can have on a person, as well as other people around them in regards to the ripple effect of crime. It's one thing for me to just present you with statistics, but I think I'm going to try and highlight what they actually mean for someone. So it's my interpretation of them, although you could argue differently if you like, and I'm happy for you to give your thoughts and ask me questions at any point if you want. I want to cover some of the barriers that people have to go on to report a crime, and then if they did report the crime, what are some of the challenges that they may experience in the legal process, going through the various different stages, the investigation process, or if it goes to court, the impact of going to court. I was also asked to talk to you a little bit about how children are affected by sexual crime. So I'm going to cover a little bit about child sexual exploitation and very briefly on some of the key elements about abusive relationships. And I might start with a little bit about what we do at Victim Support in regards to the training, and then a bit about the support at the end after you've seen how someone's affected. Internally, I said to you, we're committed to developing skills and knowledge of our staff. We've got a range of different courses that we provide: foundation training, domestic abuse, sexual crime, support after murder, talking about victims and witnesses' rights. As an organization that advocates for victims and witnesses' rights, we need to know what they are. Supporting children and young people, hate crime, children's rights, the impact of crime, which I know I delivered some training for the SSSC some time ago, and some other training courses that we have. Some organizations that have attended our external courses are vast. And I think a quote that I'll show you a bit later gives you an idea why there's a need for many organizations to understand how crime affects people. These are the bespoke training courses we did, and here you are over there. Okay, so a lot of criminal justice agencies are included in here, as well as councils and other members, housing associations, many different people. It was social work from Edinburgh. Here's a quote from Dr. Alan Moore, who came on all our training courses, and he talks about how some of the content is quite serious, emotional, humorous at times, but shocking material, but it's engaging. This is the key point of his quote, and I'll leave this with you today because this is why I think you need to be here. He says, learning about how to support victims of crime, their needs and available services that assist them is an important consideration for everybody. After all, we don't know when we might encounter such a victim, and it would be wise to be prepared. So I'm trying to prepare you as much as I can. But as Susan said, there is another side of the story. So I don't want to influence you. I just want to make you aware. You can make up your own mind. Here's another quote from Rania Ahmad from Criminal Justice Social Work, and she said she would highly recommend some of the courses for professionals. This was the Impact of Crime course, working in the field of criminal justice and beyond, and she feels it should be mandatory for newly qualified social workers to give them that basic level of grounding and knowledge. So I want to get into a discussion to start around some of the myths and realities. And please shout out or raise your hand if you think it's one thing or another. First question I have for you is, the criminal justice system is confusing to most people. Who thinks it's true? Raise your hand. Pretty much everyone in the room. And why would I be here talking to you if it wasn't true, to be honest? It is a very confusing system. From the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey, it was done every 2 years, now every year. It's pretty clear that adults in Scotland don't know very much, because 61% of adults said, I know very little. And a further 16% in the latest survey said, I know nothing at all. So that's 77%. In the previous year, it was 76%. Know very little or nothing about our criminal justice system. Why would you, is my question. Why would you know about it if you haven't learned it in school or if you've never engaged with it? And people don't want to engage with the criminal justice system unless you absolutely have to. 3% of people said that they knew a lot, and 21% said they knew a fair amount. But I would probably challenge some of those that said they know a fair amount, because what we know is that a lot of people's knowledge about a criminal justice system is based on either what they've seen on TV or documentary, and there are many different jurisdictions. And things work differently here in Scotland to other ones. People sometimes ask me, people did ask me, they asked me questions, but during the Pistorius trial in South Africa, people asked me a lot of questions, because I'm from South Africa. And they were asking me, Michael, what do you think? And I had to stop myself from responding. I wanted to respond, but I had to say, you know what, actually, after watching everything on Sky TV, after daily newscasts, etc., I learned so many things about the criminal justice system in South Africa, things I never knew about, because I've never had to engage with it. I didn't realize they didn't have jury trials, as an example, but many different things. The way crimes are prosecuted there, it's very different from how it is in Scotland. So I didn't feel comfortable to do that. And I think this brings on the main point, that if we don't know much about our criminal justice system, then there's a great need for people to have information, to know what their rights are, to know how the process works, what the role of the police is, what the role of the procurator fiscal is, what happens in a court, what does the parole board do, what input can I have into that system as a victim, a witness, or someone else that's engaged in this criminal justice system. And that's some of the things that we do for someone. And most importantly, what support is available for me. More than half of crime that occurs in Scotland is not being reported to the police. Who thinks it's true? Who thinks it's not true? I guess it's a very hard figure to get, because how do we know what's not being reported? But from some of the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey, when people were asked the questions, have you reported a crime, was there anything else that happened to you that you didn't report? And that's how we kind of gathered a figure. And what we know is only around 37%, 37 to 39 from one survey to the next, is actually reported. So if you think about an iceberg, the vast chunk is going unreported. Why?
I heard that yesterday, and it still strikes me as, I was really taken by that. And you don't know what you don't know, but do you know what type of crime?
I think I do. I have a very good idea. Domestic abuse, for example. We know that there are multiple incidents before someone reports. And now with the change in legislation, with coercive control and coercive elements, psychological abuse being included, there are multiple incidents. It usually is the physical assault that leads someone to report. Antisocial behavior, multiple incidents that may occur before someone decides to report. Yeah, stalking, by definition, it's multiple incidents that may happen, harassment, other kinds of crimes. I think there are lots. Some, a single assault that may happen, maybe that's reported straight away. But there are particular crimes. Sexual crimes, again, when I get onto one of the latest slides, there's a close link between sexual crimes and other crimes. Some of the previous ones may not be reported. I think the point of it is that it's definitely a reality then. The point is that the way it works in Scotland is if you report a crime to the police refer you on to a support organisation. Victim support, women's aid, rape crisis, abused men in Scotland, whatever it is. But if you don't report, the onus is on you as a victim to go and seek support. And we know then as well that if people don't seek support, they need to either get it from people around them who may also be affected. And if people don't come to terms with what happened, it often has influences later in their life, mostly negative ones. What we know from our referrals is 94% of them come directly from the police. 1% of our referrals are self-referrals, and 3 to whatever the remaining is comes from other sources. So it's too much pressure, I guess, on a victim to go out to seek support on their own, or at least they're not aware maybe that they need support, or maybe they don't think about what happened to them as a crime in the first place. We'll get to some of those points. How many victims of crime know the perpetrator? Most? I guess it depends on the crime, because if you look at domestic abuse, by definition, it's partner or ex-partner. Sexual crimes, which I'm talking about today, what do you think? Most of them. Around 86 point something, so 87% roughly, know that person in some way. Whether it was a partner, spouse, ex-partner, friend, acquaintance, someone you went on a date with, someone you just met at a party. Unlikely that it's the stranger. It could happen, but unlikely. That's the one the media sensationalizes, I think. Overall, for all crimes, it's around 47% in general kind of crime. Antisocial behavior, maybe stalking, you know that person fairly well. The point of it is, if someone knows the person who may or may not have committed that crime against them, it brings up issues around safety. Fear, intimidation, worried about re-victimization, and other factors. Trust, who was that person? Was it my spouse? Was it my friend? Why did they do it? Is a big question people ask. Is it the father of my children? Should I report it then to the police? A lot of issues. And someone may go back and have to live in that environment with that person again and again. The most common emotion a victim feels after a crime is fear. Who thinks it's true? Raise your hand. Who thinks it's something else? And if you think it's something else, what do you think? What is the emotion? Anger maybe? Shame could be. It depends, I guess, on some of the crimes, because for sexual crimes, maybe it is shame, a bit of shame. Maybe it is anger. Maybe it's something else. And I'll use the two of you again, if that's okay, because I knew you could handle it yesterday. Let me give you the example. Susan didn't like about something I had to say yesterday. So when I go out to my car later, that was a joke by the way. When I go out to my car later, I see my car tires are slashed, my window's been chipped. And I think, what happened? Eventually I get to my car and I see it, and am I in fear? I'm not sure. Am I angry? I probably am. Am I annoyed? Yes, definitely. David and I were chatting yesterday as well, and then we went for a drink last night, let's say, and we were talking about Brexit and independence referendum, and it got heated. And David smashed a glass and ended up stabbing me, close to my heart. How dare you, David? And I was severely injured, significant blood loss. I almost died. I was in a coma for a period of time afterwards. Am I in fear? Maybe. Do I feel stronger negative type emotions like shock, anxiety, depression? Probably. And I think it depends on the crime. Susan's crime is a property crime. David's crime is a violent crime. Property crime amounts far more, at least 2/3 of what violent crime amounts for. Violent crime about 32%, property crime the rest. And I think it depends, because the most common emotion out of the survey was annoyance. People are annoyed, but I think that's because property is heavily weighted. There's a lot of immediate support for victims of crime. Myth? I would love to say it's true, but unfortunately I can't. Because, firstly, what do we mean by support? Is it emotional support, social support, financial support? Immediate, does that mean directly after the crime, or when? And the police have a role to play, but I wouldn't see the police's role as providing those 3 immediate levels of support. That's not their role. They're there to investigate the crime. That's not taken away from the police. But there's not that much funding that goes into victims of crime. I wouldn't say the emotional support for many traumatized victims is anything special, because there's not necessarily priority status given to a victim of a crime versus someone else who's experienced something traumatic. And social support, I'm not sure. A lot of people around the person may be affected, and it depends who committed that crime. So I would be very hesitant to say it's true, although there is some level of support available. What about this one? The police, the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, and the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service will automatically provide case-specific information to victims and witnesses. Right? I would love it to be true that they automatically did it, but for the amount of crime that's going on, well, for the amount of incidents, it would be impossible, I think. There is some level of information that the police or the courts or the Crown might provide to a victim or a witness. But the legislation says that they have a right to information, but it's upon request. And most people don't realize that that's how it works. So they sit and they wait and they wait and they wait and they think, and they curse, and they might say, oh, the police are doing nothing about this. But that's not necessarily true. An investigation might be ongoing, but they don't know what their rights are. So they don't know what to do. So it's really important that people explain what their rights are, and that's something that we do. Victims want offenders to be locked up for a long time. Who thinks it's true? Raise your hand. Who thinks it's not true? Does it depend on something? What do you think? Depends on the crime again, absolutely. And I'll use the two over here. Susan, for what she did to my car and to me, I don't really want her to be locked up for a long time. Is that going to resolve things for me? I'm not sure. What I would see as justice, if I put it in that way, would be that Susan pays for my car tires to be fixed. They were 17-inch Bridgestone tires with nice trim mags, okay? And I had, what do you call it? Like tinted windows as well. I want the tinted windows back. And then leave me alone. And maybe actually I want you to go to some anger management thing. But I don't have the choice, right? That's just how I would see it. It's up to the Crown to decide what's appropriate for you, or for the courts from a judge or a sheriff. For David's case, I lost my job because I couldn't work anymore. I had permanent disability. We had to move home because we couldn't pay the mortgage anymore. I was, as I said, in a coma, significant life effects, and it was very violent, and my family was significantly affected. I would be worried that David would do that to other people. So the way I see it, I would prefer a custodial sentence for him, and preference would be at least 4 years. But it's not up to me. And in the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey, this is pretty much what victims said, or people said. They were asked the question, do you want your case to go to court? It's not their choice whether it goes to court or not. That's for the Crown to decide. But 55% of victims said, yeah, I want my case to go to court. And 39% or something said, no, I want it to be dealt with outside of court, and the rest were unsure. Outside of court, the things that I mentioned for Susan, diversion schemes, etc., community service, paying a fine, whatever it may be. Out of the 55% that said they wanted their case to go to court, it ended up about 23% of them that said they wanted a custodial sentence for the crime that was committed against them. And most of those were violent. So I think people are reasonable, is the point I would say. And they want justice or something for the person to not do that again or something of that nature. Most perpetrators of rape in Scotland are not convicted. True? Okay. It is. There's definitely truth to this, and I've got some information on a table for you. Here's some of the statistics from over the last couple of years. So where we have rapes and attempted rapes, which make up about 5% of all sexual crimes. No. I'll have a look at what percentages make so. We had 1,901 reported in 2014-15, 1,809 in 2015-16, and 1,878 in 2016-17. Sexual crimes has been increasing, and then there was a bit of a drop, and it's gone up again. And out of the reported rapes and attempted rapes, 271 of them were prosecuted. In that year, 216 in that year, and 251 in that year. And that's 14% of all the reported rapes and attempted rapes. That's 12%, and that's 13%. So between 12% and 14% of reported rapes or attempted rapes are prosecuted. Why? Why so little is the question you would probably ask. And it's reasons around the privacy nature of the crime, around consent or non-consent, around lack of corroboration, one party against another. Gathering evidence is an issue. Out of the ones that were prosecuted, 125 convicted, 105 in that year, 98 in that year. So that amounted to around 46% of those that are prosecuted lead to conviction, 48 lead to conviction, and 39%, I don't know why it was so low in that year, lead to conviction. Overall, the biggest statistic is the chance of a conviction if you report. And if I reported a sexual crime in that year, let's say, there's a 6.6% chance of that person being convicted, and a 5.8 and 5.2. And I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why there is so low rates of people wanting to report sexual crime, because the likelihood of someone being convicted is pretty low. And I'm going to talk you through the process that someone goes through. It's pretty horrific about what someone goes through. Why would you put yourself through that? The question you might ask yourself, with a chance of only 6.6 or 5.2% chance of that person. I mean, would you put a bet on if you had a 5.2% chance? I'm not saying that's what you would do, but
Are people aware of that?
I'm I think so. Because there are a lot of debates about wanting to remove corroboration in regards to this, but that's a matter I'm not going to get into. To give people greater access to justice. Not saying it will happen. But other legal systems are different from Scotland, and this is a barrier for us, I think.
Can I ask a question in relation to historical allegations? Does
Yeah.
that feature at all in relation to the percentage of successful convictions?
I'm not sure. I think it would be. So if someone, it depends on the crime. So if someone would report, let's say in 2015, that they experienced a rape or an attempted rape back in 1980, let's say, I think it would be, my view is that it would be recorded in that year, although I'm not 100% sure. That's a question probably the analyst or the statisticians would need to answer. But it's a good one. Okay, anything else? I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why we did see a spike in some of the reporting rates after Jimmy Savile and other people felt more comfortable to come forward with historical crimes, potentially. The point here is it's a difficult crime to want to come forward and report. Rape is purely about sex. What is it about? Power, control, dominance. It's not really at all about lust or attraction. Because usually the person who commits the rape targets that individual because of a vulnerability, and they want to exert that dominance or power and control. Some perpetrators target males rather than females because it gives greater sense of power and control, not because that's their sexual preference. Rape and sexual assault victims often have experienced other types of crime. Yeah? Any idea what type of crime do you think? Domestic, absolutely. Maybe stalking and other crimes. I've got a long list. There's clear links between domestic abuse and stalking. Sexual crimes happen in relationships. Part of domestic abuse, one of the categories, is sexual crimes. Physical, emotional abuse, financial abuse, coercive behaviors, sexual abuse, definitely. Male victims of rape or domestic abuse are less affected than female victims. That's not necessarily true as well. We can't, generalize in that way. Anyone can be affected by this kind of crime. And sometimes males find it extremely difficult to comprehend what happened. And we've been told by some victims that, they were worried about things afterwards. They started questioning their sexuality afterwards. They were heterosexual. But during the rape, they may have experienced an erection. And that wasn't because they found it pleasurable in any way. That was biology. That was stimulation of prostate gland. And females have said similar kind of things as well. And again, people question afterwards whether they actually did enjoy it or whether they were actually raped or not because of this. And that leads to more complications that they need to try and resolve. One or two more. If a woman doesn't like it, she can always leave in a domestic violence situation. Very simplistic point of view. And I'm glad you all went, oof, no. Because a lot of people think, oh, just leave, And it's the same for a male. Just leave. It's not easy. It's complicated. There are lots of different things in play. And my last myth, before I move on. The majority of murders in Scotland are solved. Yes? I'll give you 3 options and you can decide what I mean by solved. The first option is the police investigate a murder, a homicide, and they conduct an investigation and they're able to identify an accused. Number 1. Number 2 is the police are called out, they conduct their investigation, they identify an accused, and there's enough corroborative evidence to charge that person, and they send a report to the Procurator Fiscal. Or 3, the police conduct their investigation, identify an accused, charge that accused, send a report to the procurator, a suspect, charge that report, send it to the Procurator Fiscal. The Procurator Fiscal decides on action, takes that person to court. They either plead guilty or they are convicted. 1, 2, or 3. You just you identify a suspect. You just identify a suspect. It's hard because it means different things to different people. 2 is a clear-up rate for the police. That is solved in their eyes as in cleared up. 3 would be a conviction rate. Okay? But I'm here to talk to you from the perspective of victims, and I'm not sure, even if it leads to 3 in homicide, in murder, that it's solved. Because is it solved for the family? They've lost someone. That'll never come back. And they've experienced so much grief. Relationships break up. They lose touch with people around them. They may have to move home. Significant impacts on their life for the rest of their life, financial effects. In terms of the actual clear-up rate, yes, it is solved. Because in 2013-14, 61 victims, all of them solved. 2014-15, 59 victims, all solved. 2016-17, 58, one wasn't solved. I don't know if it's solved now. 2016-17, 61 cases with 64 victims. 3 were unsolved as at March 2017. I'm not sure if they've now been resolved. The point is here, yeah, there are. But it's not always so simple, because it's solved is not a word victims would ever use in their vocabulary for this type of crime. I'm not even sure. Some people use the word closure. I'm not sure as well about closure, because things go on after the trial. People don't think about that. The families here might still be involved in the criminal justice system 20 years later when it becomes a parole decision. Thinking about some of the effects, we talked about some of the emotional reactions like annoyance, shock, anger, denial, fear, stress, blame, numbness, depression, feeling tense and restless, and many other types of emotions that they experience. And the way that you're feeling can have physical effects too. So sleep issues, tiredness, exhaustion, headaches. If you're depressed and you're anxious, got backache, headaches, lots of pain. We know a lot of male victims who don't like to talk about their emotions sometimes. It manifests in other ways, psychosomatic symptoms like irritable bowel syndrome, stomach ulcers, hair loss, weight gain, weight loss. Those are connected to your emotions. And the other physical implications, scars, bruises, cuts, burns, temporary disability, permanent disability, murder, self-harm, STDs, STIs, unwanted pregnancies, many different physical, sweating, shaking, stutters. Social effects, it depends who may have committed that crime. There could be trust issues in the family, there could be confidence issues, isolation, fear of being alone or wanting to be with people all the time, a lot of family tension, as I said, needing to move home. Really difficult socially. Someone may turn to drugs, alcohol, and other ways of coping. That's negative. Very different person. Young people, their behaviors can change significantly from the person that they were before a crime. They start acting out. They're doing different things. They mix with the wrong crowd. They take more risks. They don't trust people around them. They can't talk to adults in their household, or they can't talk to teachers or anyone else. Financial effects are pretty substantial as well. For example, with David and me, my family, let's say, was forced into debt. I couldn't drive anymore. We had to sell the car, or my wife had to learn how to drive. I had other hospital appointments or other costs, dental treatment and everything else that I needed to pay for. It wasn't covered under NHS. People have to make insurance claims. Their premiums go up. You lose your job, your family income, your status changes completely. Sometimes people don't think about all the effects. And the way someone is affected will be a very individual thing, as individual as your fingerprint. You can't tell how someone may be. But these are some of the reactions we've noticed. In terms of sexual crimes, some of the common reactions in the immediate, while the crime may be happening, is, I'm sure you've heard some of these, fight, flight, and freeze. And you might, some people might say, why didn't you fight that person off? Or why didn't you run away? And it's not so simple, because many people do freeze, as we know. But why do they freeze? Well, it's a very instinctual thing. And the way I understand it is, in my own context, that's the only way for me. When I walk down the road and I'm wearing my headphones and I'm crossing the road, I'm on my way to work, and I walk out in the road and I just haven't paid much attention, and then a car's coming towards me. I never planned for this, but what do, either I stop the car and I go away, and I fight it, or I retreat, or I run across the road, or I just freeze for a minute. And probably that's what I do most of the time. And I didn't plan for it. I didn't know how I would react in the moment. It's a very instinctual thing. It happens as a way for you to just protect yourself, and people freeze. When you fight back, sometimes you could be putting yourself at more risk. You might feel very disorientated during the experience, almost becoming detached from reality, and it's a way of coping. Your mind takes you somewhere else. It's like an out-of-body experience, not remembering how you drove to work or anything like that and getting to work. Oh. And it's not the same as a psychotic episode like psychosis, where you've lost touch of reality. You've become detached as a form of a protective measure. And the last one is people will do whatever they have to do to focus on survival at the time. You know, I've heard of cases where it's used against people that they were wearing socks at the time of the incident, or they made that person breakfast in the morning, they stayed the night. Well, where else were they supposed to go? They live in that house. They did it out of fear, for example. And again, I interpret this the same way, that people will do what they have to do. You're lying on a sunbed on holiday. You fell asleep with your hat on, okay? And you're wearing sunglasses. I'm just going to ask you a question. And then you wake up, and you take your hat off, and you take your sunglasses off for the first time, and you open your eyes, and they're right in the sun. What happens to your eyes? You can't see. You shut your eyes and you do this or something like that, or you put your sunglasses back on. And that's your eyes protecting you, right? And it's the same thing. People will do whatever they have to do to protect themselves. You couldn't help it. It's just automatic that it happens. Some of the things people say, I can't get to work on time or meet deadlines, I think I'm going crazy, everything's changed, I'm a different person, I just want to eat or sleep all the time, I'll never trust anyone again, I just want to forget, I'm having nightmares, etc., etc. A lot of negative things. I'll run through some of this quickly, but some of the key points about sexual crime in Scotland, you probably know. Only males can commit a sexual crime of rape, but males and females can be victims of a rape. There is an overlapping definition, sexual assault by penetration, which I'll show you next. And it's around two key things, that the first person actually did that, penetrated someone, and the second point is around there was no consent. And the person didn't believe that the person did not consent at the time. So that's some of this. Some of the changes in 2009 brought in this definition of consent, and also it said things like you don't have to ejaculate for this to be considered rape. Free agreement, which is an important point because some people think if you consent to one thing, that means something else. So if you, for example, we'll look at the statistics later. If you go up to a room with someone, lead them up to a room, you kiss them, and then you subsequently get raped, but you had said no to that, well, you had consented to something else, so you consented to that. And that's not necessarily the case. You can remove consent at any time. There are some circumstances where someone cannot consent at all. Underage, under the influence, asleep, and many other cases. That needs to clearly be explained, I think, to jury members and the public, when I get onto my slide a bit later, about misconceptions around this. As I said to you, there are other kinds of sexual crimes, sexual assault by penetration. Here it's as serious as rape. It carries the same sentencing power of life. Although in this case you can have a female convicted if necessary. You're not sure what you're being penetrated with. It could be an object. Sexual assault is a broader category of crime in which rape is included because it includes unwanted touching or everything that's involved. But the powers of sexual assault when it comes to being convicted of that are much lower. It could be in a sheriff summary level, which is up to 1 year maximum sentence. Rape will be in a high court, which is a maximum of a life sentence. Coercive behaviors, like coercing a person to be present in a sexual activity, making someone look at an image, or communicating indecently with someone, exposing yourself, or watching someone like the peeping Tom, recording someone, observing someone. And this is becoming probably more possible, I guess, with technology. And then other things like administering a drug for sexual purposes. I know the most common one, Rohypnol, one of the other ones that you may know of. We said that sexual crimes were connected with other crimes. And the list is quite large. Domestic abuse, stalking, harassment, FGM, flashing, honor-based crimes, forced marriage, pornography, prostitution, trafficking, sex tourism or mail order brides, and sexual exploitation, adult entertainment, and also child sexual exploitation. This one is hard for me to look at, is the childhood sexual abuse slide, because the list is so long. And I'm not going to read it out, because I'm sure some of you may encounter this, unfortunately. But it's really difficult to see that the way that we're supposed to treat children doesn't happen, and it goes down this route, where people do take significant advantage of children. I think I covered most of this, so I'll leave this slide. It's just more about sexual crime statistics. I covered the majority. One thing I would say is that what this slide is basically saying is sexual crime's going up, it's going up, it's going up. And people sometimes interpret that as negative. When crime goes up, it's negative. But I have to think very carefully of it, because what I said to you in the morning or earlier today is that when people report the crime, they get access to support. So in my view, when sexual crime statistics go up, I see that as a positive in that people are getting referred and accessing support services. I don't believe necessarily it's that there's more sexual crime happening out there. It could be. But we know then if people report, they're getting more access to support. So in that way, I see it as a positive. We covered a lot of these as well. You're most likely to know that the person, so 87.4% said the person was their partner if it was a serious sexual assault. 94% said it was male. Hard to look at this slide, because who's the most likely person for a sexual crime? A serious sexual assault. And it's someone who's aged between 16 and 20. That's really, really young. Think about when you were 16 to 20. You may have just either got towards the end of school, finished school, just getting there, maybe moved away from home to a university, started doing things, experimenting, mixing with different people, trying to find a partner, different relationships. And I'm not blaming the young person at all, because that's what we all have to do. But it does put you at more risks in vulnerable situations.
Can I say, I've had an advantage of having seen this yesterday and been thinking about it
Yeah.
since. So I was wondering about that. I'm wondering if young people maybe report more, or they go home to their mum and go, something's happened. But as you maybe get older, you're
Maybe.
I did wonder.
Maybe. It could be. I think maybe more here, it could be crimes within marriage, maybe, because, until 1982, the law changed around marital rape. So before 1982, you could never be convicted of rape if you forced your wife to have sex with you in Scotland. 1982, it's not that long ago. But it's an interesting point. I think the majority is weighted here. Most crime, the majority is weighted here. Domestic abuse as well. Male victims of violent crime is heavily weighted here, and the perpetrator. But thank you for raising that. I think the key point here is you're so young when this happens to you that it can affect your whole life afterwards. Significant kind of experience in your life, negative one, will have such an impact. I did cover some of this as well. We know the person knew someone in some way, their partner or someone else, or they went on a date with, or they had seen before. They had never seen before. Low figures for that stranger time. Let me ask you some questions about why would someone choose not to report a crime of this nature, do you think? Any views? Well, say again, embarrassment, yeah? The stigma that's attached to being a victim of a sexual crime, or people finding out, maybe your mom or dad or other family finding out, or your children, as I said, if it was your partner who raped you and you have children. Anything else? Fear of the perpetrator, fear of the repercussions, worried, putting yourself in more danger.
Fear of not being believed.
Fear of not being believed, absolutely. And that's one of the big challenges about trusting someone else. Anything else?
Not bringing yourself through the trauma of having to relive the events.
Absolutely. Because we'll see what that's going to be like coming up, definitely. Fear of being blamed, being judged by your actions, divided loyalties, as I mentioned, maybe not recognizing it as a type of crime. It's just happened in a relationship. What about reasons for? Why would someone go on to report it then? What might be that main motivator for someone to say, you know what, I'm reporting this crime? Most people are. Some people say they're more worried about what it's going to do to me, it's going to happen to me, but they're actually more worried about someone else, definitely. Definitely. Anything else? Justice, validation of the experience. Sometimes it's circumstances that change, that lead people to go on to report these kind of crimes. Better access to support. You know, I broke it down into some of the positive outcomes that could happen if you report and some of the challenges. You know, something might be done about it, access to justice. The first stage, I see it as towards recovery because you're taking control. Your self-esteem is higher. You boost your self-esteem. The violence might stop. It might create a record history, and that person might have done something to someone else. There are rules in law about, you know, corroboration, Murov principle. You're getting access to support. Police might actually say to you, you know, what happened to you was a crime. And it's important for someone to hear, I have been a victim of a crime sometimes. For safety reasons, court orders. But sadly, the list of some of the challenges are quite significant. You know, once you report, you can't necessarily withdraw your decision. It's in the Procurator Fiscal's hands. The stress, as that gentleman said, of going through the interview process, the medical examinations, etc., upsetting your family life, maybe resentment from children. And as I said yesterday, no offense, but most people don't want social work involved in their life. They could be becoming involved in someone's life here. Losing finances, maybe more violence, feeling guilty in the end, and you just don't want, you know what your life is like now, you don't want to go into the unknown about how your life might change. What people actually said, you know, they were frightened, it might make matters worse. They thought it was a private or family matter, they rather deal with it themselves. They thought, not necessarily true, they thought the police could not have done anything about it. They had another reason. The police wouldn't take them seriously. Again, their thoughts. It was too inconvenient, too much trouble. Too much trouble to report a sexual crime. It was trivial, not worth reporting. They thought the police couldn't be bothered, or they had prior bad experiences with the police or courts, and they didn't like the police, or they were frightened of the police. We always say, and I think this is what that lady was saying over there, it's not the victim's fault if that person goes on to attack someone else if they decide not to report it, because ultimately the attacker is responsible for what they do. They have a choice to go and commit another crime. It's not, I know the victims sometimes feel bad, but if you're not in the right place and you can't report, considering there's a 5.2% chance or 6.6% chance, some people don't, but they can still receive support. How are we doing for time? Okay. So if we go through the journey of the criminal justice system, and I do a whole training course on this, but I'll keep it very brief for you. We've got the key stages, being the crime committed over here, and it may never go further than that because it doesn't necessarily get reported. But if it does, you've got the police investigation, the arrest and charge stage. Then if there's enough evidence, it goes to court. Maybe if someone's found guilty, you have sentencing. There could be an appeals process, and there could be a parole hearing. And I guess if there's a tribunal hearing for yourselves, it could run somewhere alongside, maybe over here.
Normally
Yes.
wait till the criminal match is concluded.
So around here maybe, okay? And this is a really complicated process to go through. I've broken it down very quickly for you, and I'll run through it. Some of you will know this. Crimes committed, police investigate. In the terms of a sexual crimes, the police have a specially trained officer, so a sexual offences liaison officer, who's going to meet that person who is reporting. They do a medical examination, they take statements, they get support and advice. They could have a number of statements. The police are going to interview the suspect or any witnesses. It might be obvious who the suspect is initially, it may not be. They could decide actually there's insufficient evidence, they take no further action. Or the suspect is charged, there's enough evidence, and they send a report to the fiscal. That's solved. Solved, yeah? The fiscal receives this report, they take a decision on what's going to happen. They decide, no proceedings, not in the public interest. They need further investigation, maybe. They may decide to take proceedings. That person who's now been accused of the crime appears in court, in the sheriff court in private for the first time. They can plea or not. They can decide on bail or custody. There could be an identification parade by a DVD, a Viper parade kind of thing. And then the fiscal and the defense would start doing their level of investigation, and the victim or the witnesses might be asked to meet with those parties through recognitions. There could still be a decision not to prosecute here at this point. So someone's got their hopes up going through this, and then actually there could still be a decision not to prosecute, or they could decide to still continue. And then we go further. Here we've got preliminary hearing to see if people are ready to go to trial 2 weeks before. Maybe they're not ready. Actually, they need another hearing. So then they have another hearing. Then they're ready to go to trial. The person might plead guilty, in which case no further need for witnesses or the trial itself. You go to sentence. If you go to trial, you have witnesses, you go through everything. Then you have the verdict. You got guilty, not proven. If the person is found guilty or pleads guilty, you got sentenced, and there could be an appeal. Very quick outline of the process. But imagine going through it as a person. It doesn't feel like 5 minutes. It doesn't feel like a year's passed. It feels like a lot longer. And there's so much information you want to know at each of these stages. And that's why it's important. And that's what we do as an organization, helping people understand those stages. This is our kind of graph or model of recovery that people may experience. Usually these 4 key kind of stages. Shock or denial. Shock, they might say things like, I can't believe it happened to me, why me, if only I, etc. And denial, things like, I'm fine, don't need any help, let's just move on, I just want to forget it, leave me alone. Oh. Then it's followed by the stage of disorganization or depression, where they go through all the emotions, reactions, physical, financial, social, that I mentioned to you. They need some level of support to move forward over here, otherwise you get stuck in this stage. Can't get up, can't go to work, etc. Whether it's friends, family, or support organization, you move out towards reconstructing your life, accepting, actually it did happen to me. You're starting to come to terms with what actually happened. You'll never be the same person, but you're accepting what's happened. You might move back and forth in these stages as things progress. You hear from the police, there's a hiccup with the investigation, and then it might take you back to this disorganization. It doesn't have to be as linear as this, but eventually you move forward. Some victims of crime in general can get back to life as it was. So when Susan paid for my car to be fixed, etc., left me alone, my life got back to normal. But after David's incident, I had to adjust. My life never got back to how it was. And I think for sexual crimes victims, you have to adjust to be a new person, in a way. You'll never get back to how you were. Considering you may have been 16 to 20, or even younger, if it's a crime within the family, historical abuse, you'll never be that same person. You have to adjust. And then if we take this process all the way through, shock, denial, disorganization, depression, reconstruction, acceptance, normalization, adjustment, it's over here that you start receiving a citation to come to court. And it could be 3 months to 2 years, it could be 20 years down the line, with the average time. And then you're going to go through this process of court and re-victimize you. And I don't know if anyone's ever received a citation before. It's not an easy thing to receive. I know you had mentioned something yesterday about it.
Yes, I think when we're asking witnesses to attend hearings and we're sending out our letters, we get an awful lot of quite negative feedback from that. And sometimes these letters are really nice, saying please come along and help us. And sometimes they've been in the past more aggressive, saying if you don't come, we'll take a dim view of that. But whatever we do, there's quite a lot of negative feedback about how that's phrased.
We've had a lot of people say things about the wording of the citation. So, for example, it talks about you being in prosecution, and if you're under 16, you should be accompanied by an adult. And then it says this: if you do not attend the court without a lawful excuse, the court may order that you be apprehended and punished. And it's in bold and it's in a box. It used to say the court may order a warrant for your arrest. Now it says apprehended and punished. I'm not sure which I prefer. But either way, when you receive that, how do you feel? I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm worried. Really anxious about it. Because it might be your brother, it might be your sister, it might be your mom, it might be your uncle that you've incited to give evidence. Either you might see it for or against. It's not always so simple. You might be hostile, you might be reluctant, you might be really concerned. And I would probably want to know what's going to happen for me as a witness going to court. What's the process going to be like? And I know on your website, I've watched your videos about coming to a tribunal. That's really helpful for people to know, because what we do in the criminal justice system is provide court familiarization visits, inviting people to see around the empty courtrooms, etc. That really does help. Stand up, please, if you're over 18. So I'd like you to stay standing if you're willing to tell the room when you last had sex, with whom, what you said and what it was like. I won't make you do it. I won't make you do it if you stayed standing. Ultimately, this is what we're asking victims of sexual crimes to do in a court, in a public kind of place. Yes, the room may be closed to the members of the public, but the other professionals that are going to be there, the jury members might be there too. Really difficult to talk about a negative sexual experience rather than a positive sexual experience. One of the worst you've ever had in your life. I'm going to show you this video quick. Yeah. And this is the one I was talking about. It's about Juliet talking about her experience. It's about 6 minutes. Okay? Everyone okay? She goes to give a statement to the police, and then she comes back 6 months later to talk about, going to court now. So I want you to think about if there's similarities or differences, how she was at the time of the incident and how she may be 6 months on.
To preserve their anonymity, each client is numbered, and Juliet is client number 15,823.
Right, so this is Juliet came in New Year's Day. She was the fourth one that day. We'd had 7 New Year's Eve, so it'd been quite a busy time. Attended with the police. Describes her as being alert, cooperative, says very tearful, plus.
2 days later, Juliet went to the police station to record her version of events. Now 6 months on, she's returning to view her DVD before it's used as evidence in court.
You sit where you want to sit. Okay. I'll probably just sit in this comfy chair.
Gail from St Mary's has been supporting Juliet throughout the investigation.
I am the pocket pack lady, don't worry. We did this on the 3rd of January.
Yes, yeah, it's quite some time ago.
Yeah, but it was very short after the rape, so I'm still very much traumatised. That's what's going to be weird to see. I look a mess. I just look completely dazed. I don't look like me. That doesn't look like me.
Do you want me to fast forward through this bit? It is the introductions, this.
Yeah.
To watch all that part.
I've got a vague memory of a shot. I didn't know where it came from. I just assumed it was the barman. And I remember feeling really out of it and going, what the hell are you doing here, Juliet? Go home. And it's blank. Blank. I don't remember anything. My next memory, and I didn't remember this until the next morning, and it's in an alleyway. A man is forcing his penis in my mouth, and he's got my hair, and he's pulling my face, my mouth, and I remember gagging and choking, and I remember thinking, I could bite it and it'll stop, but he hit me and said, watch the teeth, bitch. Oh,
You don't have to watch it. You can, you know.
I'd rather watch it here rather than in court.
Yeah, if you want to go outside and just have a breather.
No, I'll just get through it.
As New Year's Day wore on, I started feeling the pain. I think I rang the police and said, my bag's been stolen, and I think I've been sexually assaulted in an alleyway. I remember saying to her, I hurt. I'm really sore between my legs. Why would I be sore there? It hurts. It hurts to sit, it hurts to walk, it hurts to touch. It's the only thing I have that I know that something happened, because I don't remember. I don't remember what's happened. Except the alleyway. And then somebody holding me, love, and holding me, and holding me. Oh, fuck no. How can I not remember something like that?
There's lots of reasons, isn't there? There could be lots of reasons why.
I'm scared of how this is going to affect me. Of looking at every man in the street going, was it you? Oh. Talk about a mind trip. And watching that. I still don't remember. And I still can't believe that it's happened. I still want it to have not happened. I really do. I really do. I wish somebody would come and say, Juliet, you got it all wrong. But I know that's not going to happen.
Okay. I think, any comments about the video? It's really difficult to watch, and for her to have to go back and watch you. For me, I could see similarities. The hands on the head like that, same emotions coming back, a lot of shock, shame and guilt and anger. Anger at herself, anger at the person, anger at the process, not being able to remember. This was a case of stranger, obviously.
I was interested at the first time when she spoke. She seemed really quite strong and determined. I was thinking, God. And yet the second time she was almost more in a state for the time she was watching herself back.
Yeah, you can watch the full show on BBC iPlayer. I think it's called The Unspeakable Crime Rate. There are other victims talking about the experience too. People say, I think I'm going to skip this really, but people saying very negative things about court. You know, do I have to go through it, and I'm the one on trial, or this isn't fair, etc. Mostly negative experiences, but sometimes they say, finally, it's over at the end. Lots of challenges in the legal process. I won't go through every one of them. We've talked about a few here. We talked about the difficulties with sexual crimes and corroboration and consent. A lot of crimes don't make it to court. Identification, or is that person who's been accused, if they admitted to the crime or they've been convicted, did they show any remorse is a big part for a victim. Did they smirk during the trial? How did they react to things, etc.? Having to maybe see that person in more general terms if you don't have a screen or if you don't have a TV link, and having to see other people around the court can be quite intimidating for many people. Time waiting, or cases being abandoned or adjourned, practical arrangements that people need to make in their life in order to get there, and then being told to come back and come back and come back and then go to a different location for a trial. Giving evidence and standing up and talking in front of a court, feeling very exposed. Having to view evidence, the productions, items of clothing you were wearing, almost like triggers for trauma. Images of bruising on your body, etc. Things like that. People find cross-examination incredibly challenging and difficult. I put this one down. This is more from our perspective. People have attitudes and views, and those very members of the public might be sitting in on juries making decisions. So here, that's what I mean by jury misconceptions and prejudicial attitudes. The verdict is a very difficult time for someone where if they equate the verdict to was I believed, they usually equate a sentence to how much was I believed. That's not how it is. Criminal injuries, complicated, the environment itself, whether the media reports on your case, victim statements, so I'm going to read you one now, and understanding the sentence that's laid down by a sheriff or judge, people find that complicated, and still being included in the victim notification scheme if they want to, but it keeps that connection going between victim and perpetrator long after the crime. And then parole decisions. Very long and complicated process to be involved in, a lot of challenges along the way. The two most important ones are who that person was still, how did they react, why did they do it, and am I going to be safe afterwards? And then I mentioned yesterday the offence, and I think I used David's example, that let's say in court David was prosecuted for a minor assault for what he did to me. But in my view, it was always an attempted murder. But all that the evidence can show is a minor assault, and that's what he's prosecuted and convicted, and he gets 9 months. And that disconnect between what I believe happened in the offence and what actually happened and what was able to be proved in a court can lead to a lot of challenges in recovery afterwards, and people coming to terms with that. And that's not a fault, that's just what evidence can provide. Sexual crimes is the same. Ultimately, I summarize here how victims should be treated sensitively. They need information about what's going on. They have to have their needs considered throughout the criminal justice system by the criminal justice authorities. They need to feel like they are respected, kept safe, protected from going ahead and giving evidence if that's the case, supported throughout the process. They need to understand what's going on, and they need to be understood by other people. Only once all of those are in place, then I think someone can effectively participate in the criminal justice system. Here we've got a family, the Simpsons, and I'm not sure if you know much about the Simpsons, but Homer, he works in a nuclear plant, he's not very good at his job, he likes to drink beer. Marge, his wife, loves Homer for all his faults and everything. 3 children, Bart, bit naughty, get into trouble, on the edge. Lisa, diligent, very model kind of daughter. Maggie, too young to talk, but from the big eyes you can tell she knows everything that's going on. Marge's sisters don't like Homer. I don't know much about them. Herb's like the long-lost brother, and Homer's dad, he's going a bit senile in an old-age home, and I think she's an international spy. Anyway, there was a crime in Springfield, and Homer was murdered. How do you think Marge might react? How would she feel? Distraught, devastated, crumbled by what happened. And there will be effects on Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. Bart, he might go off the rails. He might lead to crime, offending behavior. He might have to stay up in Homer's shoes. Maybe it'll change him to be a better person. I don't know. Lisa maybe becomes withdrawn. Maybe it affects her schoolwork. Maybe she becomes more like a big sister to Maggie. Maggie, because Marge is grieving. Maybe Maggie, she can't talk, but she can see what's going on. She cries a lot now. She wets the bed. She's very clingy to mom. All these kind of behaviors. She's well aware of what's going on. Maybe Selma committed the crime. Who knows? It could be a family crime. Another circumstance, Lisa was raped. Lisa's the victim, but do you think Marge is affected? Significantly. Homer too. Other people in the family. This is the ripple effect of crime. The family are affected. The wider community are affected afterwards. I'm going to read you a victim statement because I think we talked about it yesterday. And it's by a lady who was in her 50s at the time when she wrote it. She writes about herself, her 2 brothers and sister, a victim of childhood sexual abuse. It took 4 one-hour appointments with this person to be able to help her put this together. And it's in her own words and talks about the impact it's had on her life, physical, emotional, and financial. The completion of this statement alone has been a very difficult and traumatic process for me. During the past year, I've been forced to recall the acts inflicted on me by this man when I was a child, adolescent, memories which I had buried deep within me in order to be able to try and live my life. The level of resentment and disgust I feel for this man has overwhelmed me. Not only have I had to endure the physical and emotional torment of what he put me through many years ago. All these years later, the recollection of this experience, the humiliation and disclosing in minute, excruciating detail the depravity he inflicted upon me, 2 police officers, no matter how sympathetic they were, the prospect of the same detail being poured over in a public forum of a court, and most importantly, the devastating strain this has put on my relationship with my brother and sister, whom he also abused. After years of emotional and psychological torment and distress, as a result of this experience at the hands of this man, my brother took the initial decision to report this abuse to the police, which ultimately led to my sister and I giving accounts of what this man did to us also. My sister and I had thought we had found our own way of coping over the years by burying the experience deep inside ourselves. My brother simply didn't have the same capacity to cope as we did. And for years he has battled with mental health and alcoholism as a result of the abuse inflicted on him. We are a close family and have struggled over many years to support him and his family with the varying emotional difficulties this has given him. Since first speaking with the police, I felt a flood of mixed, confusing and extreme emotions, both towards this man and my family. It has forced me to realize that although I had found a way to cope by suppressing the memory and feelings associated to what happened, it has affected and colored almost every aspect of my life. For most of my adult life, I've struggled to feel any deep emotion or convey affection or joy. I struggle with having trust or faith in anything. On reflection, this has had the most impact on my interaction with my family and my ability to feel truly relaxed and comfortable. I have also a heightened sense of protection over my children and have to exercise excessive control in almost all situations. This realization has been the most difficult to cope with. The actions of this man, not just what he did to me physically, but from the things he said to the way he smelled, has stayed with me all these years. Certain times, particularly Christmas, I can only associate with awful memories of what he did and how he made me feel. I have also had the extremely difficult and stressful task of trying to keep what has happened regarding the original experience, the investigation and the court case from my adult children, as I do not feel the knowledge of what happened should be their burden to bear. It must be conveyed that this man's self-serving desires, which he chose to inflict on 3 children, have had a devastating impact on us all to this day, and we will continue for the rest of our lives. It is my hope that the law will recognize this and that any sentence given to this man reflects the depravity of his actions and the far-reaching consequences of his behavior that it has had on myself, my brother, and my sister. So we can see quite a difficult statement to write, let alone read. Susan, you had a comment yesterday about the statement.
Yes, I was struck by the fact that they said that the police were really nice to them. I think it's words to that effect, and really that didn't make a difference in how she was feeling. And I thought that was interesting because the feedback that we get, not that we get very much feedback, but quite often witnesses will come back, or people, employers will come back and say, the panel were great, the staff were great, it was all great, there's still a big long list of things that all went wrong and things they weren't happy about. So I think you as panels do an excellent job in, I know lots of the people you're seeing are not victims of crime directly, though there are a few, which is why we're doing this, but whoever's been engaging with us, I think they find how you treat them to be incredibly helpful and supportive, but actually maybe it's quite a bit of learning for us in the aftermath about it, that actually they're still raging and they're still upset and they're still feeling all these
but it's
emotions.
important you do, treat them with respect and there's much sensitivity nonetheless.
Quite interesting.
Absolutely. Okay, I've got a few more things to cover just around child victims. So the first thing I think we need to acknowledge is that you have to expect some level of sexual behavior in young children. And the system, I dropped it on the floor, but the system that we use is this traffic light system. And it comes from Australia. I don't know what you guys use to understand what's healthy and what's not healthy and where someone may be at risk of harm or abuse. Green, obviously, those are healthy behaviors we can expect of young children from different ages. And it breaks it down into 0 to 4 years, 5 to 9, 10 to 13, and 14 to 17 years. And we can see in the different stages that it's natural to express that kind of ways of behavior through different relationships and throughout their development. This is the graph over here, and I think what we need to acknowledge is that what would be putting someone in this orange box, or what is putting them in this red box of risky behaviors? What's going on in their life, and why are they presenting with some of these sexual behaviors that are out with the norm for their development? And when we look at childhood sexual abuse, we can break it up into two kinds of contact and non-contact abuse. And in terms of contact abuse, we talked about a few of them: touching someone, rape, penetration, forcing someone to take part in activities, taking their clothes off, touching them, masturbating, making them masturbate in front of you. Difficult things. And then when we look at non-contact, again, you're not necessarily making physical contact. It could be online, a lot of online things, grooming behaviors, making them view material, watching things, or taking pictures of someone, not touching them, taking pictures and distributing them, or showing them pornography, or using that person for money, power, or status, exploiting them, which I'm going to talk to you about. And I'm not saying one is worse than the other. It's just things to note, things to be aware of. When someone's experiencing some of these, I think we need to acknowledge that they may stay away from certain people. They may want to only be around one particular family member that they trust, or no one at all. They avoid people. They might just want to be alone all the time. They might seem frightened and reluctant when you try and engage with them. They might be reluctant to socialize with other people. These are yet clear indicators. Or they show behavior that's inappropriate for their age. As I said to you, they're acting in the red zone quite clearly. Using sexual language that you wouldn't expect someone of 6 or 7 to know about. Or they have physical type symptoms, pain, soreness, etc. Pregnancy for young children. Other kinds of symptoms: people become withdrawn, anxious, as I said, clingy, aggressive, sleep problems, eat problems, wet the bed, soils clothes, depending on age. Or when you go to the later ages, you're looking at alcohol abuse, drugs, self-harm, thoughts about suicide, obsessive behaviors, taking risks, missing school, taking a lot of, having older boyfriends, all that kind of thing. I'm not going to show you the video, I don't have time, but it's a very good video to watch, Never Too Late to Tell, by the NHS, Lanarkshire. Really, really good, talking about childhood abuse. I would highly recommend you watch it. I'm going to play this one quick, because I've still got 10 minutes or so. I think I'll be done. This is important to put us in the context of how children live today. Children are still children. We need to treat them as children, but we need to treat them in the right context. And CEOP, the Child Exploitation Online Protection, put this together. We all know the story of Romeo and Juliet, I'm sure. But think of it in this context, which is for young people today. It's about a minute. Okay. I thought it was a really good video, highlighting, some of the positives around technology, but also some of the challenges and the risks involved. Child sexual exploitation, which is this video that was produced by NSPCC, the story of Jay, just before I show you this, again, a very short video clip for a minute, I just want to talk to you a little about what to expect. So children that are involved in child sexual exploitation, they may get involved in relationships, and the way to get them into that relationship is they might give someone a gift or give someone money or show them a lot of affection, and then later things change and they start asking that person to maybe perform sexual activities with them or with other people, and things spiral a little bit out of control. They're tricked almost as if they're into a loving relationship, that the person does care, this is a consensual relationship. They may be invited to parties and then given drugs or alcohol, and they could be groomed or exploited, whether it's online or face-to-face. Some people are even trafficked for the purpose of child sexual exploitation here in Scotland. But it's a very hidden crime, and people sometimes don't think of themselves as being abused. They think they're in a good relationship, that sometimes the person just acts a bit differently. But when you're involved, it can be violent, humiliating, degrading, and you might be victims of some of the crimes that I talked about earlier, sexual crimes. Children might go missing, they might leave home, or they're not staying in education. Their parents might be really worried for them. They might do things like shoplifting, etc., or other petty kind of crimes, and they could result in quite significant physical injuries when they're involved in these kind of situations. I'm not sure if you watched Three Girls, the documentary. Some of you probably watched it. Really highlighted the real issues that went on wherever that was in the north of England. I'm going to play the video, and you'll see it's very quick.
J-A-Y-J. Jay's my guy. We met on Facebook. You do not get guys like him at school. He's got his own car, he's experienced. He's so my type. He gets me like no one else does, and he makes me feel amazing. Like sex, but deep stuff too. I'm just so lucky. I want to be with him like all the time. His mates are nice to me and my girls. We can drink at theirs and do a bit of coke if we want. I mean, they get mad horny when we dance. I know Jay's only got eyes for me though. My mum does not get my life. Oh, I hate being at home, so I just stay out. Jay's brother's well nice. I mean, he gave me 100 quid the other day. He always sorts me out when I'm skint. We smoke weed and sometimes do stuff together, but Jay doesn't mind. He's cool with whatever. Slags at school keep saying my guy stepped to them, yeah, and that he's playing me. They're such tramps. Jay wouldn't even do that. We go for drives, and the way he looks at me, I can tell he loves me. I mean, he wants me to move in with him. Things are moving fast, but that's what I want. I hate everyone apart from Jay. I hate his brother. He just tries to get me wasted so he can have sex with me. Jay says he doesn't even care what I do. I just want us to get away, but we don't have the money and I don't even know where to go. This is my life. I love Jay, but I don't get why he won't open up to me. I really don't want to get pregnant. I've had sex with loads of his mates. They get me so drunk, I just go along with stuff. Jay sometimes joins in, I think. I can't remember. Don't go to school anymore. Jay's all I got. I need him.
So I think, as I said to you, things spiral out of control. It gets worse and worse. The last kind of topic I'm just going to talk to you on very briefly is around abusive relationships and what kind of things you might expect in these type of relationships between young people. And it's got, as I said yesterday as well, it's got all the hallmarks of domestic abuse going on. Things like someone's making threats, wanting to scare that person, put-me-downs, criticisms, making someone feel bad when they're alone or when their friends are around, making them do things that they don't want to do or without listening to that person, making them feel guilty for spending time with someone else and not spending time with them. That partner who's abusive doesn't really want to get involved with that other partner's friends. They don't want to engage with them. There could be an assault, hitting, slapping, pushing. They're looking through someone's mobile phone all the time, their text messages or their browsing history. They want to know where they are all the time. They want them to send them a picture when they go out or when they're here or there. They want to see what they're wearing and who they're out with. They could steal from them or make them use their money to buy them things make them have sex against their will, rape or other sexual crimes, or make them do things that they're not ready to do, or watch things online, etc., things that I had mentioned to you before. It can have significant effects, and young people might not see this as crimes, what's going on here. They may not think they're in this kind of relationship because that person does have a good side sometimes. But 1 in 5 people are suggested to be abused by either their boyfriend or girlfriends, studies by the NSPCC and Bristol University. The last thing that I want to talk about is attitudes, social attitudes, because when I was looking at the social attitudes survey, which was done in 2014, there were 3 key areas that struck me and around sexual crimes victims. Firstly, talking about, here it is. When I mentioned to you some 3 things earlier, when a woman takes a man upstairs in a bedroom and kisses that person and then is subsequently raped, if that person was someone they just met on that night of that party, adults in Scotland were asked the question, is that wrong, that behavior by that woman, or was it not wrong at all? And 24% of the adults said that that behavior of that woman to do that was very seriously wrong. Shouldn't have done that. 55% said that behavior was somewhat wrong for that woman to do. And 13% said it wasn't wrong at all. She was not in the wrong to say, no, we'll do that at all. It's pretty staggering. If that woman was in a marriage and took a husband up to the bedroom, kissed him, and then had sex against her will afterwards, 14% said that was very seriously wrong for that wife to do that. 44% said that was somewhat wrong of her, and 20% said it wasn't wrong of her at all. She had a choice. And then the same goes with revealing clothing. So if you're wearing revealing clothing on a night out and you end up getting sexually assaulted, 58% of adults said you're not to blame for what you wear. And if you're in a marriage, 60% said you're not to blame for what you wear. That's still a large proportion of people saying and having judgments about, your clothing and leading up to being a victim of a sexual crime. And 60% said you're not to blame if you're drunk. But 23%, and this is the last statement I'll leave you with, 23% agreed strongly that women often lie about being raped. And after talking to you today about everything, about what someone may experience, I'm not sure I agree with that. Why would someone lie about that experience if you have to go through that? Those are the very people, some of our members of the public, who need some knowledge and awareness about the issues, because they do sit on juries and make decisions on cases. And that's why I was talking about prejudicial attitudes. As an organization, we try and help people survive crime by making them stronger. We do that through our services and working with people in communities. We try and make sure that people are kept at the heart of justice in Scotland, advocating for their rights. And the 3 outcomes that we work towards: improving someone's health and well-being, considering their mental health, their physical health has been affected, they're under stress, anxiety. We try and keep people safe, or make them feel a bit safer, and reduce the risk of re-victimization, whether that's in a community setting or court. And we help people feel informed about the criminal justice system, about their case, what their rights are, and what they need to know in order to engage with the criminal justice system. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. And I did finish when I said I would. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. As I've said, we're not doing this training because there's any suggestion that you're horrible to anybody that appears before us. In fact, the very opposite. But just felt it might be interesting to have just a bit more information to add to some of the skills and experience that people in the room will already have. And as I said at the outset, it's obviously the victim's one part of a story, and other people that appear in front of us, though not as many as we would like, are the workers, perhaps, a perpetrator. So there's another side to the emotions and the impact of being accused of something. That was very interesting that you said people being at the heart of what you do, and perhaps that was what some of the criticism was of the SSC in the past. Perhaps have not either had the capacity or the ability to maybe think about the people being at the heart, because we've been busy trying to make the process happen, and we're very much on a journey of trying to make sure that we're keeping people a bit more at the heart, though it's not our strapline. Yeah. But in reality, that's really what we're very much focusing at, as Marie said this morning. So it just remains for me to thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming again, and I wonder if you would join in showing our appreciation. Just in terms of housekeeping, we're moving on for lunch, which is being served not in the witness room next door, but the room down from that, room 5. Yes? Yeah, it'll be there, I hope. And then what we'll do is we'll start back really sharp, so perhaps if you could be back in the room